They had never seen anything like it. A massive grizzly bear, one of North America's most feared predators, was slowly approaching their campfire in the middle of the night. The terrified campers held their breath, expecting the worst. But what the bear did next defied every survival guide ever written and would change their understanding of wildlife forever. Because in that moment, deep in the Alaskan wilderness, miles from any help instinct turned into something else. Something we don't often talk about in the wild. Curiosity, gentleness, and a kind of peaceful coexistence that doesn't need explanations. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, hit like and turn on notifications. Because the story you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about grizzly bears and their capacity for unexpected behavior. The remote wilderness of Denali National Park in central Alaska, covering over 6 million acres of pristine, untouched landscape, was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime for the group of 6 experienced backpackers who had been meticulously planning this expedition for over 2 years. They had spent countless hours studying detailed topographic maps, analyzing weather patterns and researching wildlife behavior, while training both physically and mentally for one of the most challenging and potentially dangerous wilderness experiences available in North America. Denali represents wild Alaska in its purest, most uncompromising form, a vast expanse of tundra, boreal forest, mountain ranges, and river valleys where grizzly bears roam freely in significant numbers that make human encounters both extremely rare and potentially life-threatening. This was a land where nature operates according to its own ancient rules, and where human visitors must accept the sobering reality that they are temporary guests in a world dominated by some of the planet's most powerful and unpredictable predators. The planning phase for their expedition had consumed nearly 18 months of intensive preparation, research, and coordination, beginning with obtaining the coveted backcountry permits that allowed access to Denali's most remote regions, permits that were limited to preserve the wilderness character and minimize human impact on sensitive ecosystems. Mark Davidson, a 34-year-old professional wilderness guide from Colorado Springs, was leading the expedition, drawing on over 15 years of experience, guiding groups through dangerous terrain in Alaska, Canada, the Rocky Mountains, and the Cascade Range. He had encountered grizzly bears on dozens of previous expeditions and knew firsthand how quickly a peaceful wilderness experience could turn deadly when proper protocols weren't followed. His extensive qualifications included wilderness first aid certification, advanced mountaineering training, avalanche safety instruction, and specialized bear encounter management. He had guided over 300 wilderness trips without a single serious incident, but remained constantly aware that the Alaskan wilderness demanded absolute respect and perfect attention to safety protocols. His longtime friend and fellow guide Sarah Chen specialized in wildlife photography and bear safety protocols, having spent over a decade documenting grizzly bear behavior throughout Alaska, Western Canada, and the northern Rocky Mountains. Sarah had completed advanced training programs with wildlife biologists from the University of Alaska and had developed innovative techniques for safely photographing bears in their natural habitat while minimizing human disturbance. Her expertise extended beyond photography to include animal behavior analysis, wildlife tracking, and emergency response procedures. She carried professional-grade camera equipment specifically designed for wildlife documentation, along with telephoto lenses that allowed her to capture detailed images from safe distances. The group also included Tom Bradley, a marine biologist from the University of California, San Diego, who had extensive experience with wildlife research and dangerous animal encounters, including work with great white sharks in South Africa and polar bears in the Canadian Arctic. His scientific background provided valuable expertise in animal behavior, observation, and data collection. Lisa Rodriguez brought 12 years of experience as a veteran park ranger from Glacier National Park in Montana, where she had managed countless bear encounters and had developed specialized training programs for both park staff and visitors. Her knowledge of bear behavior psychology and de-escalation techniques had prevented numerous potentially dangerous situations. David Kim contributed survival instructor credentials from Washington State, where he taught advanced wilderness survival techniques to military personnel, law enforcement agencies, and civilian adventure groups. His expertise included predator encounter protocols, emergency shelter construction, and psychological preparation for high-stress survival situations. Jenny Martinez, an environmental journalist from National Geographic magazine, was documenting their journey for a comprehensive feature article on wilderness conservation and the relationship between human recreation and wildlife habitat preservation. Her work had been published in major outdoor magazines and had contributed to important conservation initiatives. All 6 members were experienced backcountry travelers with extensive wilderness skills, comprehensive knowledge of bear safety protocols, and hundreds of combined nights camping in bear country throughout Alaska, Canada, and the western United States. They carried the latest bear deterrent equipment, including multiple canisters of high-concentration bear spray, proper bear-proof food, storage containers, emergency satellite communication devices, and detailed emergency response plans. Their equipment selection had been carefully researched and tested during training expeditions. Each item was chosen for reliability, durability, and effectiveness in extreme conditions. Their backpacks contained specialized gear for cold weather survival navigation, emergency medical treatment, and wildlife encounter management. The route they had selected for their 14-day trek would take them through some of Denali's most remote and challenging terrain, including areas where few humans had ever traveled. They would cross alpine passes, navigate dense forest, traverse open tundra, and ford major river systems, while maintaining constant awareness of grizzly bear presence. Their campsite selection on night 7 of the expedition represented the culmination of careful planning and strict adherence to bear country camping protocols that had been developed through decades of research and, unfortunately, some tragic encounters between humans and grizzly bears throughout Alaska. The site was located in a small natural clearing approximately 120 yards in diameter, surrounded by dense spruce and birch forest that provided natural windbreaks while offering excellent visibility in all directions and quick access to fresh water from a crystal-clear mountain stream that flowed down from the surrounding peaks. The clearing had been used by previous camping parties as evidenced by an existing fire ring and minimal impact camping signs, but showed no recent bear activity or signs of wildlife conflict. They had arrived at the site in early afternoon, allowing ample time for careful setup and thorough area inspection. They had followed the strictest food storage procedures that were mandatory throughout Denali National Park, hanging all scented items including food toiletries, cooking equipment, and garbage in bear-proof containers, suspended from trees over 250 yards from their sleeping area and at least 15 feet off the ground using specialized rope and pulley systems. Their cooking area was established well away from their sleeping tents, following the recommended triangle configuration that separated food preparation, food storage, and sleeping areas by significant distances. This arrangement was designed to prevent bears from associating human scent with food sources and to provide escape routes if encounters occurred. Their campfire that evening was built in the existing fire ring using only local deadfall wood and following leave no trace principles. The fire ring was surrounded by a carefully constructed circle of rocks positioned to contain sparks and embers, while providing optimal heat distribution and minimal environmental impact. The flames danced gently in the cool evening air that carried the crisp mountain scent of spruce needles, alpine flowers, and the distant sound of flowing water, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees as the group shared stories about their wilderness experiences and carefully planned the next day's challenging route through a remote valley that appeared on few maps and had been explored by very few humans. The temperature was dropping steadily toward the low 40s, as typical for mid-September in interior Alaska, and the campfire provided essential warmth and comfort, as well as an important psychological sense of security in the vast wilderness darkness that surrounded their tiny island of human presence. The conversation that evening had focused on wildlife encounters and bear safety reminders. Everyone in the group had previous experience with bears, but they discussed protocols and emergency procedures as they did every evening during the expedition, maintaining the constant vigilance that was essential for safe travel in grizzly country. They had seen bear sign throughout their journey, including tracks, scat, and claw marks on trees, but had not yet encountered any bears directly. This was actually preferred, as the goal of bear country travel was always to avoid encounters through proper planning, noise-making, and campsite selection. It was around 11:30 p.m. when Sarah, who was known among her colleagues for her exceptional hearing and finely tuned wilderness awareness, honed through years of photographing dangerous wildlife, first noticed the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps moving deliberately through the forest, approximately 60 yards from their carefully chosen campsite. The sound was distinctive and immediately recognizable to anyone with extensive wilderness experience. The heavy, deliberate footfalls of a large animal moving through dense forest undergrowth. with the characteristic rolling gait that could only belong to a bear. She immediately signaled for complete silence, holding up her hand in the universal gesture that all wilderness travelers recognize, while tilting her head to listen more carefully to sounds that could mean the difference between a peaceful night and a life-threatening encounter that could end in tragedy. The footsteps were deliberate, measured, and rhythmic, far too heavy to belong to a deer, elk, moose, or any other common Alaskan wildlife, and moving with the unmistakable rolling shuffle that experienced wilderness travelers learned to recognize as the signature movement pattern of a large bear moving through dense forest terrain. Sarah's heart began racing as adrenaline flooded her system, activating the heightened awareness and acute sensory perception that had kept her alive during dozens of previous bear encounters in some of North America's most dangerous wilderness areas. She pointed silently toward the forest edge where the sounds were originating and whispered the single word that every camper in bear country dreads hearing spoken in the darkness: bear. The word sent an immediate chill through the group as everyone's training and survival instincts kicked in. Simultaneously, they had prepared for this moment, but actually facing a bear encounter in the wilderness darkness was a profoundly different experience from practicing scenarios during daylight training sessions. Mark immediately began implementing the bear encounter protocols they had rehearsed extensively during their pre-trip training sessions and had practiced multiple times during the first week of their expedition. He quietly instructed everyone to remain absolutely calm, move only when necessary, and in slow, deliberate motions while avoiding direct eye contact that bears might interpret as a challenge, threat, or sign of aggression. They slowly stood up from their comfortable positions around the warming campfire, making themselves appear larger and more formidable, while staying close together as a unified group, rather than scattering in different directions, which could trigger a chase response in a predator that was capable of running over 30 miles per hour through dense forest terrain. The massive grizzly bear emerged from the tree line, approximately 50 yards from their campsite, and even in the flickering orange and yellow light of their campfire, the experienced wilderness travelers could immediately see that this was an enormous adult male bear, probably weighing between 650 and 750 pounds, with the distinctive muscular shoulder hump, thick neck, and silver-tipped guard hairs that marked him as a mature dominant male in his prime. The bear's size was truly impressive, even by Alaskan grizzly standards. His head was massive, his shoulders were incredibly broad, and his overall presence conveyed the raw power and potential danger that made grizzly bears the apex predators of the North American wilderness. Every instinct honed through years of wilderness experience and every piece of bear safety training they had received from experts throughout North America told them this was an extremely dangerous situation that could turn deadly in seconds without warning. Grizzly bears were known throughout Alaska for their unpredictable behavior, particularly around human food sources or when surprised by unexpected encounters in what they considered their territory. The recommended response, according to every survival manual, wildlife expert, and Park Service publication, was to back away slowly while making calm verbal sounds to identify themselves as humans, rather than prey animals, while preparing bear spray and other deterrents in case the encounter escalated to an aggressive confrontation. Bear spray was effective only at close range and required proper positioning, wind awareness, and steady nerves to deploy effectively. The group had practiced with inert training canisters, but using real bear spray against an actual charging grizzly was a scenario they hoped never to experience. But something was immediately and remarkably different about this particular bear's behavior that set it apart from the typical grizzly encounters that Mark and Sarah had experienced during their combined decades of wilderness guiding throughout some of North America's most bear-populated regions. Instead of showing the classic warning signs of aggression, surprise, territorial defense, or food-seeking behavior that characterized most bear-human encounters, this grizzly approached their campsite with what could only be described as calm, deliberate curiosity. His movements were slow, measured, and purposeful, but without any of the tension, alertness, or aggressive posturing that typically preceded dangerous bear behavior. The bear stopped frequently during his approach to sniff the air carefully and observe the group of humans without displaying any of the warning signs that experienced guides learned to recognize as precursors to an attack. His ears were positioned forward in a relaxed, curious posture rather than pinned back against his massive head in the aggressive stance that signaled immediate danger. His enormous body showed no signs of the muscle tension, coiled energy, or defensive posturing that characterized a bear preparing to charge, defend territory, or compete for resources. Most remarkably, he seemed to be focusing his attention primarily on the dancing flames of the campfire itself, rather than on the humans or their equipment and supplies. The bear's approach was methodical and appeared almost deliberate, as if he had a specific destination in mind, rather than randomly wandering through the forest and accidentally encountering their campsite. This behavior was highly unusual, as most bear encounters involved bears that were surprised by human presence or attracted by food odors. As the grizzly drew closer, covering the distance between the forest edge and their campsite with the flowing, efficient movement of an apex predator perfectly adapted to his environment, the campers held their collective breath, expecting the encounter to turn dangerous at any moment. Bears throughout Alaska were well known to associate human campsites with easy food sources, and many of the most serious and tragic attacks occurred when bears investigated cooking areas or improperly stored supplies, driven by the powerful combination of intelligence, curiosity, and an opportunistic approach to finding high-calorie meals that could sustain their massive bodies. Human food was particularly attractive to bears because of its high calorie density, strong odors, and easy accessibility compared to the natural foods that required significant energy expenditure to locate and consume. Bears that became habituated to human food sources often became increasingly bold and dangerous. But instead of heading toward their meticulously secured food storage area or showing any interest in their backpacks, cooking equipment, or other gear that might contain appealing scents, the bear walked directly to the edge of their carefully constructed fire ring and simply sat down. The massive grizzly positioned himself approximately 8 feet from the dancing flames and settled into a comfortable resting position, with his enormous front paws crossed and his massive head held upright in an alert but completely relaxed posture while watching the fire with what appeared to be genuine fascination and obvious enjoyment. His body language was completely non-threatening and remarkably peaceful for such a powerful predator. His breathing was calm and regular, his posture was relaxed, and he showed none of the restless energy, constant vigilance, or defensive positioning that characterized bears in stressful, threatening, or competitive situations. For nearly 25 minutes that felt like hours to the terrified campers. The bear remained essentially motionless, except for occasional subtle shifts in position to get a better view of the flames, or to adjust his seating for greater comfort. His massive eyes reflected the firelight as he watched the dancing flames, with obvious fascination. The campers barely dared to breathe as they witnessed behavior that contradicted everything they had learned about grizzly bear encounters during their extensive preparation and training. None of them had ever heard of, read about, or been told about a wild grizzly bear voluntarily positioning itself near a human campfire for extended, peaceful observation. Sarah, who had photographed and studied bears throughout Alaska, western Canada, and the northern Rocky Mountains for over a decade, whispered in barely audible tones that she had never witnessed anything even remotely resembling this behavior in her extensive experience with wild grizzly populations. In her professional experience, grizzly bears typically investigated human campsites very quickly and then moved on to continue foraging, or showed obvious signs of stress, agitation, and potential aggression when encountering people in areas they considered their territory. The idea of a bear sitting peacefully by a campfire was completely outside her experience. Mark quietly reached for his professional camera equipment, knowing that documenting this unprecedented encounter could provide invaluable insights for wildlife researchers, park managers, and future wilderness travelers, while potentially contributing to a revolutionary understanding of grizzly bear intelligence and behavioral flexibility. The bear seemed completely unconcerned by their presence or their quiet movements, focusing entirely on the hypnotic dancing movement of the flames that cast shifting patterns of orange and yellow light across his massive silver-tipped coat. The firelight highlighted the incredible detail of his fur and the impressive muscular development of his shoulders and neck. What happened next was even more extraordinary and would be discussed, analyzed, and debated by wildlife experts for years to come. The grizzly began making soft, gentle vocalizations that sounded almost like contented sighs or the low-frequency huffing sounds that bears typically make when they are relaxed, comfortable, and completely free from stress or perceived threats. These sounds were nothing like the warning calls, aggressive vocalizations, or territorial huffing typically associated with defensive, competitive, or threatening behavior. The bear seemed to be expressing something that could only be interpreted as satisfaction, peaceful contentment, or perhaps even enjoyment of the warmth and light provided by the fire. The vocalizations continued intermittently throughout the encounter, with the bear occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to express comfort or pleasure. The sounds were so gentle and peaceful that they seemed more appropriate for a domestic animal than one of North America's most feared predators. The bear then performed an action that left the entire group of experienced wilderness travelers completely speechless and fundamentally challenged everything they thought they knew about wild animal behavior, intelligence, and problem-solving abilities. He carefully reached out with one massive paw, equipped with claws that could easily kill a human, and gently moved a partially burned log that had fallen away from the main fire. The movement was deliberate, precise, and obviously intentional, clearly designed to adjust the fire's configuration rather than scatter or destroy it. The bear used his claws with remarkable dexterity and apparent understanding to reposition the log so that it would continue burning effectively and contribute to the overall heat and light output of the fire. This demonstrated not just intelligence but an understanding of cause and effect relationships. Lisa, the veteran park ranger who had managed hundreds of bear encounters during her 12-year career in Glacier National Park, whispered that she was witnessing something that had never been documented in scientific literature, official Park Service reports, or any wildlife management publication she was aware of. Bears were certainly known to be intelligent, curious, and capable of significant problem-solving, but this level of apparent understanding of fire maintenance and purposeful interaction with human equipment was completely unprecedented in wildlife research and management experience. The grizzly continued to tend the fire over the following hour and a half, making small, careful adjustments to burning logs and even using his massive paws to gently push fallen embers back toward the center of the flame, where they would continue contributing to the fire's heat and light output. Every movement was precise, deliberate, and obviously intentional, suggesting not just intelligence and curiosity, but a sophisticated understanding of how fire worked, what actions would maintain it effectively, and even an appreciation for the benefits that fire provided in terms of warmth and light. The bear seemed to have quickly grasped the basic principles of fire management, including the need to maintain proper spacing between logs, allow adequate airflow, and keep combustible material properly positioned for sustained burning. His actions demonstrated problem-solving abilities that impressed even the most experienced wildlife professionals. For over an hour and 45 minutes, the massive predator maintained his peaceful vigil by the campfire, occasionally making gentle, contented vocalizations and continuing to make small adjustments that kept the flames burning steadily, brightly, and efficiently. The campers remained absolutely motionless, both terrified by the proximity of such a powerful predator and amazed by the unprecedented behavior they were witnessing and documenting. This was clearly a once-in-a-lifetime encounter that was fundamentally redefining their understanding of wildlife intelligence. Tom, the marine biologist, began taking detailed written notes of every aspect of the bear's behavior, recognizing that they were documenting something that could revolutionize scientific understanding of grizzly bear cognitive abilities, environmental awareness, and problem-solving skills. The extensive notes included detailed observations of the bear's body language, vocalizations, fire-tending techniques, and apparent emotional state throughout the encounter. This documentation would later prove invaluable for scientific analysis and publication. The bear's actions suggested complex thinking processes, environmental understanding, and purposeful behavior that far exceeded what wildlife researchers believed possible in bear species. The level of sophisticated tool use and fire management demonstrated cognitive abilities typically associated with much more advanced species. As the night grew progressively colder, with temperatures dropping into the upper 20s, the bear seemed to genuinely appreciate and seek out the warmth radiating from the fire, occasionally extending his massive paws toward the flames, in gestures that looked remarkably similar to how humans instinctively warm themselves around a campfire. The bear's behavior around the fire was so remarkably human-like that it created an almost surreal atmosphere. The massive predator seemed to be enjoying the same basic comforts that humans had sought from fire for thousands of years: warmth, light, and perhaps even the psychological comfort of a barrier against the darkness. His body language remained completely relaxed throughout the extended encounter. He showed no signs of stress, territorial behavior, or preparation for aggressive action. Instead, he seemed to be genuinely enjoying the warmth, light, and perhaps even the social aspect of sharing the fire with the human campers. The bear occasionally looked at the campers, but his gaze was calm, curious, and somehow peaceful rather than threatening. Challenging or predatory, His eyes seemed to convey intelligence, awareness, and perhaps even a form of acknowledgement or acceptance of their shared presence. Around 1:45 a.m., after nearly 2 hours and 15 minutes of peaceful coexistence that had challenged every assumption about predator-human relationships, the grizzly stood up slowly and deliberately, making no sudden movements that might alarm the campers or trigger defensive responses. He stretched his massive frame in the characteristic way that bears do when preparing to move to a new location. His movements were fluid and graceful, despite his enormous size, demonstrating the remarkable athleticism that made grizzly bears such effective predators. The bear then performed an action that none of the witnesses would ever forget, and that would be discussed, analyzed, and remembered for the rest of their lives. He looked directly at each member of the group for several seconds, maintaining calm, intelligent eye contact that seemed to convey recognition, acknowledgement, and perhaps even some form of gratitude or appreciation. His gaze was penetrating but somehow gentle, intelligent, but not threatening. The experienced wilderness travelers felt as though the bear was consciously acknowledging their presence, their shared experience around the campfire, and perhaps even expressing thanks for their peaceful coexistence. The eye contact lasted for nearly 30 seconds as the bear looked at each person individually, as if memorizing their faces or saying a personal goodbye to each member of the group. The moment felt profoundly meaningful and created an emotional connection that transcended species boundaries. Then the magnificent animal turned and walked calmly back toward the forest, moving with the same measured, deliberate pace he had used when approaching the campsite. He moved with the confident, unhurried gait of an animal that was completely comfortable in his environment and felt no need for defensive behavior. He disappeared into the darkness as quietly as he had arrived, leaving the stunned campers sitting around a fire that had been carefully maintained and improved by one of nature's most powerful and supposedly unpredictable predators. The silence that followed his departure was profound and filled with awe. The group remained awake for the rest of the night, processing what they had experienced and discussing the profound implications of the bear's behavior for understanding wildlife intelligence, predator-human relationships, and the complex cognitive abilities that might exist throughout the natural world. They spent hours analyzing every detail of the encounter, trying to understand what they had witnessed and what it might mean for their understanding of animal consciousness and intelligence. The experience had challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of wild animals. They all agreed that what they had witnessed fundamentally challenged basic assumptions about wildlife behavior and suggested that the relationship between humans and large predators might be far more complex, nuanced, and potentially positive than anyone had previously imagined. The encounter had demonstrated that under the right circumstances, with proper respect and appropriate behavior, peaceful coexistence between humans and even the most powerful predators was not only possible, but could reveal remarkable insights about animal intelligence and consciousness. Sarah's extensive photographs and high-definition video footage of the encounter became some of the most important documentation of unusual bear behavior ever recorded by civilians. The images and video clearly showed the bear's fire-tending activities, peaceful demeanor, and obvious intelligence. Wildlife biologists, animal behaviorists, and cognitive researchers from universities across North America, Europe, and Asia requested copies of the material to study this unprecedented example of interspecies cooperation and advanced problem-solving behavior in wild grizzly bears. Dr. James Morrison, a leading grizzly bear specialist from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, called the encounter groundbreaking evidence of cognitive abilities in bears that scientists had never imagined possible. The bear's sophisticated understanding of fire maintenance and his peaceful coexistence with humans suggests intelligence levels that require us to completely reconsider how we view these remarkable animals. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a renowned animal behaviorist from Stanford University, added that the bear's purposeful tool, use apparent appreciation for warmth and comfort, and sophisticated problem-solving, demonstrated cognitive abilities and environmental awareness that placed grizzly bear intelligence in an entirely new category of animal consciousness. Dr. Michael Torres, a wildlife psychologist from the University of Montana, noted that the bear's sustained peaceful behavior and apparent enjoyment of the fire suggested emotional complexity and aesthetic appreciation that had never been documented in wild bear populations. The story spread rapidly through outdoor recreation communities, wildlife research organizations, social media platforms, and news outlets worldwide, inspiring both wonder and serious scientific debate about the intelligence, emotional capacity, and behavioral flexibility of grizzly bears. Some researchers suggested the bear might have learned fire-tending behavior through previous positive experiences with human campers or through observation of human activities in areas where bears and people occasionally interacted peacefully. Others theorized that the behavior demonstrated innate problem-solving abilities and environmental understanding that indicated much higher cognitive function than previously recognized in any bear species. The encounter became a landmark case study in wildlife behavior programs, university courses, and wilderness safety training. The implications extended beyond bear research to broader questions about animal consciousness, intelligence, and the potential for positive relationships between humans and large predators. The encounter suggested that many assumptions about predator behavior might need fundamental revision. The 6 campers completed their remaining week in Denali without any further unusual wildlife encounters, but the experience had fundamentally and permanently changed how they viewed their relationship with the natural world and their understanding of the intelligence that exists in wild animal populations. They had witnessed something that proved wild animals were capable of behaviors that defied human expectations and challenged basic assumptions about the cognitive limitations of non-human species. The encounter had opened their minds to possibilities they had never considered. Mark and Sarah incorporated the story into their professional wilderness guiding programs, using it to teach clients about the complexity of wildlife behavior, the importance of remaining calm and respectful during unexpected encounters, and the need for humility when entering wild spaces. Their courses now included extensive discussion of animal intelligence and the potential for positive interactions with wildlife. When proper protocols and respectful behavior were maintained, their clients often reported that the story changed their entire perspective on wilderness travel. Jenny's detailed article about the experience was published in National Geographic magazine and won several prestigious awards for environmental journalism, including the Wildlife Journalism Award and the Conservation Communication Award, bringing the story to millions of readers worldwide. The article sparked international interest in grizzly bear cognitive abilities and led to increased funding for research projects studying tool use, problem solving, and social behavior in wild bear populations. Several major universities launched new research initiatives based on the encounter. The story was translated into dozens of languages and published in wildlife magazines around the world, inspiring similar research projects and changing how wildlife managers approached human-bear conflict resolution in many countries. Years later, the 6 campers continued to gather annually to commemorate the anniversary of their extraordinary encounter, each of them crediting the experience with fundamentally deepening their appreciation for wildlife and completely changing their understanding of the intelligence, complexity, and emotional depth that exists throughout the natural world. The annual gatherings became opportunities to share new research findings, discuss conservation initiatives, and reflect on how the encounter continued to influence their personal and professional lives. Each member had been profoundly changed by the experience. The encounter had taught them that some of nature's most feared creatures might also be among its most intelligent, and that peaceful coexistence between humans and large predators was not only possible, but could reveal remarkable insights about animal consciousness. The experience had also reinforced the importance of approaching wilderness with respect, humility, and openness to possibilities that challenged conventional understanding. The bear had taught them that nature held mysteries and intelligence far beyond human comprehension. If this incredible story of unexpected wildlife behavior, peaceful coexistence, and the hidden intelligence of wild animals touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share it with someone who believes that the wilderness holds mysteries, intelligence, and possibilities for connection that we are only beginning to understand. Sometimes, the most feared creatures reveal the gentlest hearts and the most sophisticated minds, and sometimes the greatest adventures come not from conquering nature, but from learning to coexist respectfully with the magnificent beings who call the wild their home. The grizzly bear who shared their campfire that night became a symbol of the complex intelligence that exists throughout the natural world, and a reminder that our understanding of animal consciousness is still in its infancy, waiting to be revolutionized by future encounters and discoveries.